Probably a small percentage do, but making an attempt to memorize the text is not something Jews pursue. Those people who have it all memorized have simply retained the information through constant exposure, reading and study. I have never made a serious attempt to memorize any parts of Torah, but I also can easily recite reasonably large chunks of it at the drop of a hat, just because I've read it a lot. I will admit that I generally skip the genealogical lists, though. I should clarify, I can recite it in English translation, my Hebrew is not that great. At any rate, a person memorizes things through repetition and effort. Jews routinely read through the Torah entirely over the course of each year. All you need to do is pay a reasonable amount of attention, and go over it yourself. Someone who regularly attends synagogue services will have heard the entire Torah, and read it 40 times in 40 years. Even someone who isn't even trying to memorize it, will recognize most of the material and probably have parts of it by heart. More important to Jews are the interpretations, the commentaries and the wide-ranging custom of discussing the meaning of each passage of Torah. Along with the traditional views, one is expected to also develop one's own views. So rather than rote memorization, we expect people to think and talk about, what does this mean? However, there are certainly people who have the Torah memorized. There are some people who have the entire Tanakh memorized, the whole Bible, and a very few who have the Talmud memorized as well, which is a far more astounding feat than memorizing the Bible, because the Talmud is much, much larger. Whole volumes, dozens of books. Now that amazes me. A few with good memories. My son-in-law's uncle claimed that my son-in-law knew the whole Torah by heart when he was 7 or 8 years old, but he denies it, and is no longer religious. My nephew won the International Tanakh Bible competition in Israel one year. No monetary prize, but he met his wife coaching contestants for the next year's competition. When answering the questions, he quoted not only the biblical verses being asked about, but also some of the following verses. He also sent a note to the judges explaining that they had incorrectly rejected a correct answer from one of his competitors. We were prouder of him for that than for winning. He often chants the Torah at his synagogue on Shabbat. Since the Torah scroll has no punctuation, vowel symbols, or cantillation symbols showing how to chant it, you have to be very familiar with the text and notes in order to chant it for the congregation. I've done it a few times in the United States, where they're more desperate for readers, never in Israel, and it took me more than 10 hours to prepare a small portion of that week's reading. But my nephew is so familiar with the Torah and has chanted it so many times that he can do the whole of each Shabbat reading with little or no preparation. There have been Jewish scholars with amazing memories who could pass the pin test. A copy of the Talmud, much longer than the Torah, and printed as a multi-volume book, rather than being handwritten on a scroll, would be opened, and the point of a pin placed on one word. The scholar would then tell which word the pin would pass through on each page if pushed through a number of pages. And they would be right. Apparently, they were blessed with photographic memories. By the way, in my experience it is much easier to memorize a text if you have a melody for it. I can sing the entire Hebrew grace after meals by heart, using the traditional Ashkenazi melody. It takes several minutes, but I cannot recite it by heart without singing it.